150 Tories at Hammond's store. Cornwallis saw a threat to his outpost at 96 and divided his army, sending Lieutenant Colonel Tarleton with 1,050 troops to intercept Morgan. Morgan, discovering that Tarleton was in pursuit, retreated toward the Broad River. Realizing Tarleton would overtake him before he could reach Greene in North Carolina, he decided to make a stand at the Cowpens. It was a landmark well known to the Patriot militia, who were called to join him. Outnumbered by Tarleton 2-1, Morgan needed the militia to even the odds. Would they come in great enough numbers to give him a fighting chance? They did come from North Carolina, Quaker Meadows, Virginia, and South Carolina. A wounded Elijah Clark sent 75 of his finest sharpshooters from Georgia. The Spartan militia, along with others from the surrounding area, rode into Morgan's camp to meet this latest threat. Tarleton must be stopped. Daniel Morgan knew his men. Some had fought at Kettle Creek, or Kings Mountain, or Musgrove Mill. Many had fought Indians in defense of their homes on the Appalachian frontier. The night before the battle, he moved among the militia. He called for courage, but did not ask them to face the British bayonet.
Just hold up your heads, boys. 3 fires and you are free. When you return to your homes, how the old folks will bless you, and the girls will kiss you for your gallant conduct.
Before dawn, Morgan positioned his soldiers in 3 lines. The first line of skirmishers was made up of crack marksmen from Georgia and North Carolina. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph McDowell commanded North Carolina militia on rising ground on the American forward right, and Major Samuel Hammond commanded the skirmishers on the American left. Morgan directed them to fire at the oncoming British and melt into the second line. Along this second line, Morgan placed the militia units under the command of Colonel Andrew Pickens. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Hayes' unit, which straddled the road, was positioned slightly forward to help protect the skirmish line. Morgan ordered them to fire at the advancing British at a killing distance, targeting the officers. Fearing they would be attacked by bayonet-wielding British regulars, he ordered them to retire to the rear of the third line and regroup before the British line could recover. The third line consisted of Morgan's flying army, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Eager Howard of Maryland, who had orders to stand fast. William Washington's dragoons were posted in a swale behind the third line, while mounted scouts watched for Tarleton down the Green River Road. At daybreak, Tarleton's light dragoons scattered the scouts and struck the skirmish line, but were driven off by deadly fire. The headstrong Tarleton, denied the opportunity of viewing Morgan's troop alignments, rapidly formed his line to attack. The skirmishers retreated to the militia as instructed. As the British cannon fired, Tarleton's infantry advanced with a cheer. Morgan cried in return,
They gave us the British hello, boys. Give them the Indian hello.
The militia waited for the order to fire. The enemy was within 50 yards and moving rapidly when the militia fired. The British line staggered, but rallied and moved forward again, only to be hit by another volley. One British lieutenant claimed,
2/3 of the British infantry officers had already fallen, and nearly the same proportion of privates.
The Continental Line executed an un-echelon maneuver to allow the militia to pass through and regroup on the American left. A portion of McDowell's sharpshooters pulled to the right into Maple Swamp. Tarleton's dragoons charged the retreating militia, but were struck by Washington's cavalrymen and driven from the field. Now the Continental Line of Morgan's army confronted the British. The American and British lines stood firm and exchanged volley for volley. Tarleton ordered his late-ranking reserves, the 71st Highlanders, to attack. They were ordered to give no quarters or take no prisoners. The Highlanders moved to flank the American right. After an initial volley, the Highlanders and swords. Howard ordered the Virginians to refuse the flank or face the enemy, but the order was misunderstood, and the Virginians turned and moved away from the line. Other units, seeing the Virginians move and thinking a retreat had been ordered, turned and moved back by company, trailing arms and reloading as they went. An alarmed Morgan galloped to the front of the retreating troops, and meeting Howard, selected a spot for them to face about and fire.
Face them out, boys! Give them one good fire and the victory is ours!
Morgan rode to the reforming militia and, waving his sword, cried out,
Form, my brave fellows! Old Morgan was never beaten!
The British, believing they had routed the Americans, were coming on like a mob. The American line turned and fired into the pursuing British at close range, then charged with bayonets. Half of the British line fell, and the rest, stunned by the attack, threw down their weapons and fell face forward on the ground in surrender. Others fled the field on foot. Seeing the confusion in the enemy line, Howard ordered a bayonet charge on the Highlanders. Washington's dragoons charged the Highlanders' rear, and reformed militia under Pickens now emerged on the American right and attacked the Highlanders. McDowell's sharpshooters swarmed out of the swamp to cut off any retreat. Meanwhile, Carolina and Virginia militia of the Flying Army flanked the British right. The double envelopment was complete. Howard gave the order to take the British guns, and the Marylanders surged forward and captured the two 3-pounders from the few remaining gunners. Too late to save the guns, Tarleton ordered his reserve dragoons to charge, but they refused, and about 200 fled the field, abandoning their commander and their fallen comrades. Cries of "Tarleton's quarters" were heard along the American lines. The brutality of Tarleton's men at Waxhaws had not been forgotten. However, Morgan and Howard had no intentions of allowing a massacre. The orders,
"Give them quarters!"
were obeyed. With the infantry taking prisoners, the daring Washington pursued Tarleton and his officers, clashing swords with them until Tarleton shot his horse. The defiant Tarleton, along with 50 of his dragoons, escaped. Washington and his cavalry pursued Tarleton down the Green River Road, but did not catch him. A battle that had lasted less than an hour, Cowpens was a turning point in the Southern campaign. The Continental Army and the backcountry militia had defeated the elite of the British Army. 40 British officers and over 300 British soldiers were killed or wounded. The Americans took about 40 officers and over 550 soldiers prisoner, captured 800 muskets, 2 cannon, and nearly 70 slaves who traveled with the British as servants.